Over the last 9 weeks, we have been studying Psalm 23 together, phrase by phrase. And what we have discovered in every phrase of Psalm 23 is how generous God is. And what we said is that we need to have gratitude in return. And so a lot of us have been turning a lot of rocks over the last couple weeks. And you guys, you know what? I'm keeping my rock. I really like it. And this habit has been truly good for me. So I didn't tell you this yet, but I'd like to keep my rock right now. So I really like it. And I hope this has been a great journey for you too. Maria, thank you for sharing your letter. And you guys, hey, if you haven't done the 4 letters of gratitude yet, you still got a couple days. It would be a great thing to do together. So here we are. We've been talking about how generous God is. And we've been talking about how we need to express gratitude in response to that. But what I want to do this morning is show you 2 very different images of God's generosity and his compassion. And I want to see which one resonates more with you, because whichever one resonates more with you tells you something about yourself. So here's the first one. We've been using this image over the last couple weeks. Jesus. With the woman caught in adultery, and many of you know we're in the perspective of we are her, we're down on the ground, our life is blown up. And what's Jesus' stance? This generous spirit coming down to where she is to help her up, to get her back on her feet, to say, your sins are forgiven. I do not condemn you. Go, live life. All right, so that's a beautiful image. Let me show you, here's another image of the same generosity and compassion. Some of you are like, what? What are you talking about? The 10 Commandments, man, that's like, talk about rigid. It's literally etched in stone. Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do that. One size fits all. How can you possibly say that these 2 things represent the same thing? Well, which one of these images sums up the Bible for you? Like your gut reaction. Like when you think about what's the Bible, which one of these images? Some people come to the Bible and they say, look, this is the revelation of God. This is God's truth. Like truth has come into the world. And he tells us what is right, what is wrong, what is true, what is false. This is a revelation of God's truth. And other people say, no, this is all about God's love. This is about God's love for people. This is about this humane relationship with God. This is about people. It's not about propositions. So which way do you lean when you think this is what the Bible mostly is? Well, here's what I want you to think about. What we find out in Exodus and Deuteronomy is when God gave the law, he said, be holy, for I am holy. Be holy, for I am holy. Why am I giving you all these laws and rules and regulations? Because I want you to be holy. I want you to be different. I'm saying do not conform to your culture. Do not conform to the values and the morals of your culture, because they are based on fads that go in and out of fashion. Any of you who are older than 20 years old, think about the morality in our country. First, this is good, now that's bad. No, that's good, now this is bad. Like all over the place. Come away from that. My word stands forever. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my word stands forever. Here are truth and value and revelation that you can stand on. It's a solid rock. It's a foundation. Now, here's what I want you to get. To be holy is to be set apart different, but mostly to be holy is to be like God, to have the same attributes as God. Well, what did we just say was a main attribute of God? Generosity. Therefore, be generous, for I am generous. So here's what I really want you to get. It's not that God is holy and he's generous. It's not that you should be holy and you should be generous. It's that generosity is part of God's holiness. Generosity is a subset of God's holiness, and you are called to be holy as he is holy. Therefore, you are called to be generous as he is generous, because it's part of what it means to be holy. So if you're not generous, you're not holy in the way he's calling you to live your life. So I believe God's generosity is actually buried in the law if you have the eyes to see it. So let me ask you a question. When's the last time you heard a Thanksgiving sermon from Deuteronomy? Me neither. Guess what we're doing today? I am so stoked. Like, really, I am. God's word is so amazing. So, I believe that in the very center of the law, God has set a table of welcome and generosity if we have the eyes to see it. So where we're going to be is in Deuteronomy. And so if you have a Bible, I really encourage you to open up, because we're going to be reading this together. It's page 297 in the Pew Bible. It's Deuteronomy chapter 14, and we're going to be in verse 22. Now, this is right in the middle of the law. So Deuteronomy, real quick, onomy, law, to law, the second giving of the law. This book is all about the rules, the regulations, and the laws. Now, just as we celebrate in America Thanksgiving at the end of November, which marks the end of the harvest, it turns out that the ancient Israelites had a Thanksgiving at the end of the harvest. So, starting in verse 22, be sure to set aside a tenth of all your fields and produce each year. In other words, at the end of the harvest. Eat the tithe, and many of you know tithe means a tenth. Eat the tenth of your grain, new wine and oil, and the firstborn of your herds and flocks in the presence of the Lord your God at the place he will choose as a dwelling for his name, so that you may learn to revere the Lord your God always. So what's happening there? He's saying, take 1/10 of everything you produced this year, take it to the sanctuary, to the temple, and don't just give it to God, enjoy it. So this is talking about a tithe, and a tithe is the idea that I'm going to take a tenth of what I earn each year, and I'm going to give it away. And I'm going to give it to God, and as you're about to find out, I'm going to give it to God in several different ways. Verse 24. But if that place is too distant, and you have been blessed by the Lord your God, and cannot carry your tithe, because the place where the Lord will choose to put his name is so far away, then exchange your tithe for silver, and take the silver with you, and go to the place the Lord your God will choose. What's that telling us? If you had a big harvest, and you take a tenth of that harvest, and it's 1,000 pounds of wheat, but the sanctuary is 50 miles away, you don't want to try and lug 1,000 pounds of wheat to the sanctuary. This verse declares that money is good. Money is a really functional thing. What it's saying is, you have these goods and services, they're too big, it doesn't work to carry them all the way to the temple. Convert them to silver, convert them to money, travel across the land with the money, which is very easy to carry, and then when you get there, reconvert it back to goods and services. So, picking up in verse 26, use the silver to buy whatever you like. Cattle, sheep, wine, or other fermented drink, or anything you wish. Then you and your household shall eat there in the presence of the Lord your God and rejoice. Man, if that is not a description of Thanksgiving dinner, I don't know what is. Go out, buy a whole bunch of really good food, get together, have a meal, and rejoice. Rejoice. So look at, it's taking the tenth I was going to give to God, and I'm actually using part of it to celebrate with my family. Picking up verse 27, and this is a really big and do not neglect the Levites living in your towns, for they have no allotment in inheritance of their own. And some of you know that there were 12 tribes of Israel, and one of them, the Levites, were set aside to produce public worship. They were set aside, be holy as I am holy. Their job was to provide public worship. So they did the sacrifices, and they took care of the temple and the music and the prayers. So what does that tell me? Part of my tithe is to make sure public worship happens. Verse 28. At the end of every 3 years, bring all the tithes of that year's produce and store it in your own towns, right? So not at the temple, but at your own towns, so that the Levites, who have no allotment or inheritance of their own, and here's another really big and the aliens, that's the immigrants, the fatherless, and the widows who live in your towns may come and eat and be satisfied. In other words, a big part of that money that I'm to give away is to help those who are immigrants or other or disenfranchised. A part of it is to help those who are in need physically, or they don't have any defense. There's nobody in their corner, the orphan and the widow. And notice, it's not just I'm giving charity, but we're all coming together so that they too can be satisfied. Like one big gathering in. And how does it end? And so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hands. In other words, I'm to work. In other words, if I'm able to work, I need to work. It's a gift from God. I am not to be a slacker. I am to work. I'm to produce, so then I can take what I have earned and help others who are in a more desperate situation than me. All right, so how can we sum all this up? 3 big points to me. First, in verse 22, this idea of the tithe, right? So we're in Thanksgiving season, and this is what I often love to talk about this. We are called to be a generous people. If I'm going to call myself a Christian, it means I need to be willing to be truly generous. Now, for some of you, I know the idea of giving 10% of your money away sounds like a heart attack, right? And I'm not saying it's easy, but there are people in this room who are really trying to live this way, because we're called to be radically generous because of what God has done for us. Then down in verse 28, that money is also to go to the Levites, right? Because they don't have fields. They're too busy doing it. So really, and it's kind of funny, it's coming from me as a pastor, what it's saying is you need to support the salaries of the church staff and the heating and the light and the musicians and the music and the prayers. I, as a Christian, have a responsibility for public worship. Have you ever heard that before? No, it's just me and Jesus. No. If you love Jesus, and you can see this all through the Old Testament and the New Testament, if I am a Christian, I have a responsibility for public worship. And there in the middle, though, verse 26, then you and your household shall eat there in the presence of the Lord your God and rejoice. It's not just give, and sacrifice. It's like rejoice, and don't feel guilty for spending money on good food at a celebration. So be generous as the Lord your God is generous. Therefore, it says, I'm called to tithe in verse 22. I'm called to thanksgiving in verse 26. And I'm called to generosity in verse 28. I love God, I provide public worship. And I love my neighbor, I help the other, the alone, the orphan, the widow. This idea runs all the way through the Old and the New Testament. Many of you are familiar with James chapter 1, verse 27 in the New Testament, which says this: religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. What's the opposite of polluted? Unpolluted. What's that? Holy. Be holy as I am holy. And note, the table isn't just for me and my family. It's the idea that we all come together. In fact, I want you to hear this, and those of you online too. If it looks like you're going to be alone this Thanksgiving, there's a group of people in our church that are getting together around a common table at one of their homes. And they'd love to have you be there with them. So if that's you, if you were going to be alone for Thanksgiving, if you send an email to office@leverington.org, we'll get back to you with the details on that. If you want to be part of it, you need to do it today, because you can't just show up on Thanksgiving Day we've got 30 more people than we planned, right? So if you want to be part of this, send us an email today, and we'll get you connected. So here's the deal. As I read Deuteronomy chapter 14, I see that I'm to be generous and use my tithe to create 4 feasts. And I love this. I love the idea that I'm taking the money I'm earning and I'm using it to help make 4 different feasts happen. Here's the first feast, public worship. Once again, I, as a Christian, am responsible for public worship. Where? In my local community. Next, a feast for those in need. I am to help people in this local community, orphans and widows and the alien and the immigrant. That's why we do things like the soup kitchen and the food drive, and we just talked about the coat drive to help people in the Philadelphia area, and there's lots more that our church could be doing. Third, though, community Thanksgiving. In other words, to take my money and use it so that my friends and my church family can have a great time. Like when we do social events here, when we gather around a meal, think about we're going to have this silly cook-off, right? We're going to spend money on our Advent Sunday. That's a good thing. God delights in it. Because all of these are meant to be for God's glory. Why am I doing each one? To give God glory. So are any of those kind of one you haven't thought of before? This is why we are to be so generous, all those reasons. Now, Deuteronomy 15 gives us a realistic explanation for why our gratitude needs to lead to real generosity. Deuteronomy chapter 15, verse 4 says this: there should be no poor among you. There shouldn't be, should there? There should be no poor people in the world. But look at verse 11. There will always be poor people in the land. Jesus himself intentionally quotes this verse right here, and he says, the poor will always be with you. And what we see in this is that Christianity has a very realistic understanding of the world. This is what should be, right? Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, right? We're praying for that. But we also know this is a fallen, broken world full of selfish people and people grasping for power and politics. And that means there will always be poor people. Now, can we make less poverty? Yes. Will we ever eliminate it? No. And any ideology that promises you they're going to eliminate poverty, run as far away from them as fast as you can. You just need to look at world history to see where that leads. No, rather, this very realistic understanding goes on in verse 11. Therefore, because there always will be poor in the land, therefore, I command you. So let's hear that. God is saying, I command you to be open-handed toward the poor and the needy in your land. Are you open-handed? I love this definition of generosity. Are you open-handed to the people around you, to the people that you meet? All right, well, Langdon, what does this mean? Does this mean we should give all our money away? That the more money you give away, the holier you are? Is it wrong to accumulate wealth? Well, in the Christian world, there are 2 extremes on this answer. I'm going to give them to you. Some of you are going to get mad. You're going to say, that's an unfair caricature. I don't care. Okay, here's how it goes. Here's the first one. God is just waiting to bless you. He He wants to bless you not tenfold, hundredfold, thousandfold. Well, that sounds good. I want in. How do I do that? I'll tell you how. Send your love gift offering to me. Langdon Palmer, P.O. Box 666, Hallelujah Avenue, and see a miracle. That's one. This is the other. You stuffing your face on Thanksgiving. You in your comfort and your ease. How can you stand to do this when there are people starving to death right now, when there is so much suffering in the world, and here you are in your luxury and complacency? All of your privilege is under the judgment of God. There is a way out. Send your money to me. Langdon Palmer, P.O. Box 666, Self-Righteous Justice Boulevard, Philadelphia, PA. Now, that might be a little mean, but really, we hear both those voices, don't we? Both of those are a corruption of the gospel. They are not true to Jesus. And so I want to ask you, which one of those are you more likely to be seduced by? Okay, well then, Langdon, then what does the Bible say about material wealth? Well, Deuteronomy 14 just told us, tithe and be generous to the church and to the immigrant and to the orphan and to the widow, so that the Lord your God may bless you in all the work of your hand, which you do. So apparently there is some kind of relationship between gratitude and generosity and God's blessing. Okay, well, does that mean that if I'm faithful, then I am guaranteed that I will be wealthy? Listen to Proverbs 11:24, and I love the way the Message puts it. It is possible to give freely and become more wealthy. But those who are stingy will lose everything. The generous prosper and are satisfied. So what I hear there is, it's no guarantee that you're going to be wealthy, but it's very possible, and a lot of people find this out in their own lives, that they give freely and yet they actually continue to gain wealth. But here's the one thing that really is clear: if you're stingy, you're not going to be happy. Now, you guys remember a couple weeks ago we talked about those 25 research papers of all proving the good things that happen in your life when you practice gratitude? Did you know they did studies on the other side? Like, what happens to your life when you don't practice gratitude? I remember this moment really well. I'm driving home from work. I'm listening to NPR News, and they're like, this is breaking, like new revelation. This is unbelievable. Research has just discovered something. You're never going to believe it. The more materialistic you are, the less happy your marriage is. Duh, are you kidding me? That's the great revelation? Of course it is. The more materialistic people are, the less happy their marriage is. I mean, we want to think, well, what I do with my money is over here, and the rest of life is over here. No, it's all woven together. And if you don't have a generous spirit, you're going to be messed up. Okay, then how do generosity and gratitude and your own happiness go together? I'm looking out at faces, many of you I've known for a number of years. And so I'm going to share what I've shared on several Thanksgivings, because I am absolutely convinced this is how the world works. I want to tell you one more time the 4-step sequence for happiness that I've shared with some of you before. Here's how it works. In order to have long-term joy, I need to be generous. In order to have long-term generosity, I need to be thankful. In order to have long-term thankfulness, I need to be humble. So imagine if you start at the other end and work from where you are. As I strive to be humble, I find myself feeling more thankful. As I strive to be thankful, I feel myself being more generous. As I strive to be generous, I begin to encounter the joy of God Himself. True gratitude leads to true generosity. So guys, here's the deal. Let's get the rubber on the road. One of the best ways I can tell if I am truly thankful is to look at how generous I am being. But here's the tricky part. It's not just your money and your time. See, I can see this, and I have seen this in people. They get kind of smug. They're like, man, I give so much money away. I spend so much of my time helping other people. Yeah, but if I spend all this time helping other people, but at the same time I'm talking behind their backs, I'm not actually generous at all. Brothers and sisters, do you gossip? Do you pretend to know other people's motives? Do you talk behind their back? There's a word for it. It's called sin. Jesus says in Mark 12:36, I tell you that men will have to give account on the day of judgment for every careless word they have spoken. For by your words you will be acquitted, and by your words you will be condemned. So I want to ask you again that hard question. If you're really honest, do you indulge in the latest gossip? Did you hear that so-and-so is really mad at so-and-so because they said so-and-so? Now, I get it's all around you. Be holy, for I am holy. I'm asking you to resist the temptation to join in. Are you truly a generous person, or do you jump to conclusions about someone else? Do you have a critical spirit? A critical spirit is the exact opposite of a generous spirit. In other words, do you give people the benefit of a doubt? That is being a generous person. You see, I'm telling you this because there's no time like Thanksgiving to think about this. We're all about to be in a big group of people. And you don't know what to talk about, so you're kind of awkward. So let's start talking about some stuff, and the next thing you know, you're talking trash about somebody. No. And some of us are like, well, I'm not really to blame, because I don't say it. I just happen to be there when people are saying it. No. I want to get serious for a minute, you guys. No. If you are passively listening to gossip, you are continuing a culture of gossip, whether it's in your home, whether it's at work, or even in a church. Perhaps even in a church is like the most dangerous place. If you're just sitting there being part of it and saying nothing, you are keeping a culture of gossip, and that is death. Death to a real community. So I'm challenging you. If you find yourself this Thanksgiving and the conversation's starting to go somewhere, I think you need to speak up. I think you say, hey, let's not talk about her when she's not here to defend herself. Or say, look, I don't think this conversation is really bringing out the best of both of us. Let's talk about something else. Here in this church, I really think we're called to say, we don't do that here. We don't do that here. Why? Because we're called to be like Jesus. Okay, so you might say, yeah, but Langdon, I really do know what they were thinking. I really do know why that person did that. I know what they're really like, and it's just not right. Well, so did Jesus. What did Jesus do when he saw someone who was actually literally caught right in the act? What did Jesus do? He had a generous spirit. Be humble. Be humble, that you might be grateful. Be grateful, that you might be generous. Be generous. And then you will truly have a happy Thanksgiving. Amen. Thanks for joining us today as we strive to think carefully about our faith. You can help keep this ministry on the air by making a donation at leverington.org. For now, may the Lord bless you and keep you. We'll see you next time.